At 70, Kevin Costner finally talks about the threats and reveals why he quit. What if the biggest risk you ever took destroyed everything you'd built in 40 years? Kevin Costner walked away from Yellowstone at the peak of its success, turning down over $1 million per episode to chase a dream he'd had for 36 years. Most people thought he was crazy, that leaving the hottest show on TV for a passion project was career suicide. But what nobody saw coming was the absolute devastation that followed. A $38 million financial disaster, a brutal divorce that played out in courtrooms, a sexual harassment lawsuit that just got the green light to go to trial, and whispers of bankruptcy that have Hollywood insiders stunned. This isn't just about quitting a TV show. This is the story of how one man's obsession led to the collapse of his marriage, his fortune, and possibly his legacy. And in this video, I'm going to break down exactly what happened, step by step, revealing the shocking decisions that turned a Hollywood legend into a cautionary tale. Kevin Costner was standing at the peak of an incredible comeback. After years of fading into Hollywood obscurity, he'd found his way back to relevance with a role that would change everything. John Dutton, the ruthless patriarch of the Dutton family, in a new series called Yellowstone. The show wasn't just a hit, it was a cultural phenomenon. Week after week, over 10 million viewers tuned in to watch Costner command the screen as the powerful Montana rancher who would do anything to protect his family's land. It was the kind of role actors dream about, complex, layered, commanding, and for Costner it was a lifeline. He was back on top, his name was everywhere again, critics praised his performance, fans worshipped him, and the money. The money was absolutely extraordinary. Costner was reportedly earning over $1 million per episode. For a man who'd spent the better part of a decade in the wilderness of Hollywood, Yellowstone was a gift. It gave him everything. Respect, relevance, and financial security. But here's the thing most people didn't understand. Kevin Costner wasn't satisfied. While millions of fans watched him week after week, while his bank account filled with more money than most people see in a lifetime, his mind was somewhere else entirely. Because deep inside, Costner had a dream that had been burning for 36 years. A dream that had nothing to do with Yellowstone. A dream that would eventually cost him everything. And in 2018, as he stood at the height of his comeback, the seeds of his downfall were already being planted. He just didn't know it yet. The year was 1988. Kevin Costner was on the verge of superstardom, and he had an idea. A sprawling, epic Western saga about the settlement of the American West after the Civil War. He called it Horizon. It would be massive, ambitious, spanning 12 hours across 4 separate films. It would show the brutal reality of pioneering into new territory, the violence, the sacrifice, the cost of building something from nothing. Costner believed it was the most important story he would ever tell, but in 1988, nobody wanted to make it. The Western was dead. Hollywood had declared the genre finished, irrelevant, a relic of the past. So Costner did something else instead. In 1990, he directed and starred in Dances with Wolves, another Western epic that everyone told him would fail, except it didn't. It became a cultural phenomenon, grossing over $424 million against a $22 million budget. It was nominated for 12 Academy Awards and won 7, including Best Picture and Best Director for Costner himself. At 35 years old, Kevin Costner had brought the Western back from the dead and become one of the most powerful stars in Hollywood. He was untouchable, but success bred arrogance. In 1997, Costner directed The Postman, a post-apocalyptic epic that he was convinced would be another masterpiece. It wasn't. The film had an $80 million budget and earned just $20 million at the box office. It was one of the biggest flops of the 1990s, and it nearly destroyed Costner's career. Critics savaged him. The industry turned its back. And Horizon, the project he'd been developing since 1988, stayed on the shelf, waiting. Over the next 2 decades, Costner tried repeatedly to get Horizon made. He negotiated with Disney in 2003, but discovered they wouldn't give him the budget he needed. He expanded it into a trilogy in 2014. He collaborated with writer John Baird to turn it into 4 separate films, but no studio would fully finance his vision. They wanted creative control. They wanted to make it safe, commercial, profitable, and Costner refused to compromise. Then came Yellowstone. And suddenly, Costner had leverage again. He had relevance, he had an audience, and he had a terrifying realization. He was running out of time. At nearly 70 years old, if he didn't make Horizon now, he never would. So he made a decision that would change everything. He would finance it himself. The problem started quietly in 2022. Yellowstone's production schedule was brutal. Filming typically ran from April through October, sometimes stretching even longer. That's 5 to 7 months of solid work, leaving little room for anything else. For most actors, this wouldn't be an issue. You show up, you do the work, you collect your paycheck. But Kevin Costner wasn't most actors. He had Horizon calling to him, and the window to make it was closing fast. At first, he tried to make both projects work. He'd film Yellowstone during the scheduled production months, then use the gaps to develop Horizon. But as Yellowstone became more successful, the demands increased. Creator Taylor Sheridan was expanding the universe, adding spin-offs, extending seasons. The production timeline kept shifting, stretching later and later into the year. What had been a manageable schedule was becoming impossible. Costner found himself trapped between two competing visions, Sheridan's expanding empire and his own 36-year-old dream. By 2023, the tension had reached a breaking point. Contract negotiations for the final season turned ugly. Sources close to the production claimed Costner was making impossible demands. He wanted script approval, meaning he'd have veto power over every episode. He wanted a significant pay increase, and most problematic, he wanted reduced shooting time. Costner's team countered that the real issue was Sheridan's constant schedule changes. They claimed production kept moving the filming dates around, making it impossible for Costner to plan anything else. He'd carved out time for Horizon, only to be told Yellowstone was shifting its timeline again. The conflict became personal. Crew members reportedly grew frustrated with what they perceived as Costner's ego and unavailability. Producers claimed he was only willing to work 1 week on the second half of season 5. Costner's attorney fired back immediately, calling this an absolute lie and ridiculous. The truth, Costner insisted, was that he'd done everything his contract required. He'd shown up when they told him to show up. But when he arrived on set in May 2024, ready to film, there was no script ready. It felt like a waste of time, proof that the production was as disorganized as he'd claimed. Behind closed doors, the real battle was about control. Taylor Sheridan was known for writing solo, maintaining complete creative authority over his projects. The idea of giving an actor, even one as accomplished as Costner, script approval was unthinkable. And Costner, who'd won an Oscar for directing Dances with Wolves, wasn't about to be treated like just another hired gun. Two powerful egos, two competing visions, and only one production could survive. June 2024. Kevin Costner posted a video on Instagram that would shock the entertainment industry. He was sitting in what looked like a comfortable room, casual but serious, and he delivered news that millions of fans had been dreading. He wasn't coming back to Yellowstone. After a year and a half of working on Horizon and thinking about Yellowstone, he'd realized he just couldn't continue. The door was closed. John Dutton was finished. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Fans felt betrayed. They'd invested years following the Dutton family saga, and now the patriarch was abandoning them. Social media erupted with anger and confusion. How could he walk away from the biggest show on television? How could he leave millions of dollars on the table? Costner was reportedly earning between $1.2 and $1.5 million per episode. With a typical season running 10 to 14 episodes, he was making somewhere between $12 and $20 million per year just from Yellowstone. That's the kind of money most actors never see in their entire careers, and he was walking away from it. But Costner had made his calculation. He believed the Yellowstone audience would follow him to Horizon. He had 10 million viewers tuning in every week to watch him play John Dutton. If even a fraction of those fans bought tickets to see Horizon in theaters, the film would be a massive success. He needed Horizon to gross at least $80 million to break even on his personal investment. With Yellowstone's built-in audience, that seemed achievable, almost guaranteed. It was a risk, sure, but a calculated one. At least that's what Costner told himself. When Yellowstone's Season 5 Part 2 premiered in November 2024, fans got their answer about John Dutton's fate. The show opened with a devastating reveal. John was found dead in his home, an apparent self-inflicted death while he waited to face an impeachment tribunal set up by his son Jamie. But the family didn't believe it. Neither did the audience. The show quickly revealed it was murder, a conspiracy to take down the Dutton patriarch. It was a dramatic, shocking way to write off the character, and Costner wasn't there to see it play out. His co-star Luke Grimes later admitted to reporters that when Kevin left, some of the conflict left with him. It was a telling statement, one that hinted at just how difficult things had become on set. The cast and crew moved on without him. Yellowstone finished its run to massive ratings, proving they could tell compelling stories even without John Dutton. Meanwhile, Kevin Costner was betting everything on Horizon. And he was about to discover just how badly he'd miscalculated. The decision that would change everything came quietly, behind closed doors. Kevin Costner went to his bank and did something that financial advisors would call absolute madness. He took out a mortgage on his 10-acre waterfront estate in Santa Barbara, one of the most valuable properties in California. The estate was worth an estimated $145 million, a monument to 4 decades of success in Hollywood. And Costner was willing to risk it all for Horizon. When the final numbers came in, the reality was staggering. Costner had personally invested $38 million into Horizon, not the $20 million that early reports claimed. His accountant reportedly had what Costner himself described as a conniption fit. Financial advisors begged him to reconsider. They showed him the numbers, the risks, the potential for complete financial ruin, but Costner wouldn't listen. He told filmmaker Francis Ford Coppola in an interview that it was his life, and he believed in the idea and the story. He wanted his children to understand this about him, that he did what he believed in even when he had fear. The production budget for Horizon ballooned to over $100 million for the first 2 films alone. Costner's $38 million was just part of it. Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema agreed to distribute, but they took a relatively small percentage, only about 8%. That meant Costner was shouldering an enormous portion of the financial risk. If the films succeeded, he'd make a fortune. If they failed, he'd lose everything. And here's what made it even more terrifying. Costner had already shot films 2, 3, and 4 back-to-back. He was committed to the entire saga before knowing if audiences would even show up for Chapter 1. What nobody outside Costner's inner circle fully understood was the pressure this put on his personal life. His wife, Christine Baumgartner, was reportedly terrified about the financial exposure. She watched her husband mortgage their home, pour tens of millions into a passion project that might never make its money back. She begged him to reconsider, to scale back, to let someone else finance the risk, but Costner was convinced. He had the Yellowstone audience. He had his reputation. He had decades of goodwill built up with movie audiences who'd loved Dances with Wolves. In his mind, Horizon was guaranteed to succeed. The strain on their marriage became unbearable. Arguments about money, about priorities, about what mattered more, his legacy or their family's security. Christine could see what Costner couldn't or wouldn't. This obsession was consuming him, changing him, putting everything they'd built together at risk. And she was right to be terrified, because the gamble Costner was making wasn't just financial, it was existential. If Horizon failed, it wouldn't just cost him money, it would cost him everything. May 2023. Just as Kevin Costner was pouring his final resources into Horizon, his personal life exploded in the most public way possible. His wife, Christine Baumgartner, filed for divorce after 18 years of marriage, citing irreconcilable differences. The date of separation was listed as April 11th, just weeks earlier. For Costner, it came as a complete shock. They had 3 children together, Caden, who was 16, Hayes, who was 14, and Grace, who was 13. From the outside, the marriage had seemed solid, but behind closed doors, the pressure of Horizon had created cracks that became canyons. Christine had reportedly been begging Costner not to risk their financial security on the film. The arguments had been constant, escalating, destructive. She watched him mortgage their home, watched him become consumed by an obsession he couldn't let go. And when she'd finally had enough, when the weight of it all became unbearable, she walked away. What followed was one of the most brutal celebrity divorce battles in recent memory. Christine immediately filed for child support, and her initial request stunned everyone. She wanted $248,000 per month, claiming this was the minimum needed to maintain the children in their accustomed lifestyle. Costner's team fired back hard. His forensic accountant argued that Christine was padding the bill with her own expenses, including costs for plastic surgery, personal trainers, and luxury items that had nothing to do with the kids. Costner himself testified that the actual amount needed was closer to $51,000 per month. The gulf between these numbers, nearly $200,000, set up a nasty court fight that would drag on for months. But the first battle wasn't about money, it was about the house. Their prenuptial agreement stated that Christine had to vacate their $145 million beachfront estate within a certain time frame after filing for divorce. She refused to leave, claiming it was the only home the children had ever known. Her lawyers argued that Costner was trying to kick his wife and children out of their home, that the legal basis for his request was cruel and unnecessary. But the prenup was clear, and eventually a judge ordered her to move out by the end of July 2023. She found a rental property for $40,000 per month and began the painful process of separating her life from his. During this time, rumors started swirling about a man named Josh Connor. He was described as a family friend who'd been close to both Kevin and Christine for 7 to 8 years. Connor had actually been renting one of Costner's guest houses, a beachfront property that went for over $60,000 per month. Sources claimed that while Kevin was away filming, Christine and Josh had grown very close. She would visit his guest house almost daily. They'd hang out with their kids. It looked suspicious. During the child support hearings, Connor's name came up repeatedly. Christine's attorney insisted they were just friends and nothing more. But the implication hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Had something been going on while they were still married? The marriage was over. The woman Costner had built a life with was moving on. And his dream project, the thing he'd sacrificed everything for, hadn't even premiered yet. June 28, 2024. The moment Kevin Costner had been waiting for his entire life. Horizon. An American Saga Chapter 1 premiered in theaters across the country. Just weeks earlier, it had received an 11-minute standing ovation at the Cannes Film Festival. Costner had stood on that stage in France, tears in his eyes, believing he'd created something truly special. Critics at Cannes praised the scope and ambition, the sweeping cinematography, the complex storytelling. He'd poured his heart, his money, and his marriage into this film. Now it was time to see if audiences agreed. Opening weekend results came in like a punch to the gut. $11 million against a production budget of $100 million. It was a catastrophic failure. The Yellowstone audience that Costner had counted on never showed up. Industry analysts were shocked. They'd predicted at least 15 to 20 million if his core fan base turned out, but it seemed like leaving Yellowstone had actually hurt him with those viewers. They felt betrayed, like he'd abandoned them for his own ego project. And the general movie-going public, they just weren't interested in a 3-hour Western that was only the first part of a 4-film series. The reviews started rolling in, and they were brutal. Critics called Horizon convoluted, disjointed, and self-indulgent. One reviewer wrote that he could not fathom committing another 540 minutes of his time to this bloated ego trip. Another said it was hard to believe Costner left Yellowstone to make such an embarrassing, poorly told mess. The film's Rotten Tomatoes score settled at 49%, meaning critics were split but leaning negative. Audiences weren't much kinder. The biggest complaint was that it felt like the pilot episode of a television series, not a feature film. There were too many storylines, too many characters, no clear resolution. It introduced Kevin Costner as a lone cowboy helping a woman in need, Sienna Miller as a survivor of a town massacre, Luke Wilson leading a wagon train, and more. But none of these threads went anywhere. They just stopped waiting for Chapter 2. For people who'd paid money to see a complete story, it felt like a ripoff. Week after week, the numbers got worse. By the time Horizon left theaters in August, it had earned just $29 million domestically and $3.6 million internationally. The worldwide total, $32.6 million, against a $100 million budget. Even with Warner Brothers only taking 8% for distribution, the math was devastating. Costner needed $80 million to break even on his personal investment. He got less than half that. Behind the scenes, panic set in. Chapter 2 had been scheduled to release on August 16th, just 6 weeks after the first film. The plan was to build momentum, to have people excited for the continuation. But with Chapter 1 bombing so badly, Warner Brothers and New Line Cinema pulled the plug. They removed Chapter 2 from the release calendar entirely. No new date announced. The second film was already finished. It had even been screened at the Venice Film Festival, but the studio had no faith in releasing it theatrically anymore. Kevin Costner had lost his $38 million investment, and somehow, things were about to get even worse. May 2025, just as Costner was trying to figure out how to resurrect his Horizon franchise, a legal bombshell exploded. A stunt performer named Devin Labella filed a lawsuit in Los Angeles Superior Court, accusing Kevin Costner and the Horizon production companies of harassment, creating a hostile work environment, and inflicting emotional distress. The allegations were serious and graphic, claiming that on May 2, 2023, during filming of Horizon Chapter 2, Labella had been subjected to a violent, unscripted assault scene without warning or proper safety protocols. According to the complaint, Labella had been hired as the lead stunt double for actress Ella Hunt, who played a character named Juliet in the Horizon films. She was an accomplished professional, having worked on high-profile projects like Barbie and American Horror Stories. The day before the incident, May 1st, Labella had performed in a scripted and choreographed assault scene. It had been planned carefully, with multiple takes, and it wrapped without any issues. Everyone seemed happy with the work. But the next day, something changed. The lawsuit claims that Costner, who was present on set as the director, suddenly decided he wanted to add a new scene. This one would involve a different actor climbing on top of Juliet, and violently pulling up her skirt in what appeared to be the setup for an off-camera assault. The scene wasn't listed on the day's call sheet. It was completely impromptu. Labella's lawsuit states that Ella Hunt became visibly upset when told about the scene change. Hunt allegedly refused to do it and walked off the set. At that point, Labella was asked to stand in for the actress without being given a proper explanation of what was about to happen. When filming began, Labella alleges that the actor mounted her and violently pulled her skirt up while she was pinned down. She didn't know when the scene started or ended because Costner never called action or cut. Most disturbing, the lawsuit claims there was no intimacy coordinator present, no stunt coordinator informed, and the set wasn't closed. Multiple people watched on monitors in Video Village as this played out. All of this violated SAG-AFTRA protocols, which require 48-hour notice for any intimate scenes, the presence of an intimacy coordinator, and consent from the performer. Kevin Costner's response was swift and aggressive. His attorney, Marty Singer, called the allegations absolutely false and completely contradicted by her own actions and the facts. Singer claimed the scene had been explained to Labella beforehand, that she'd given a thumbs up to her stunt coordinator, indicating she was willing to film if needed. He pointed out that Labella had dinner with the stunt coordinators that evening in good spirits and made no complaints. Costner himself filed a declaration with the court, calling the allegations deeply disappointing and a bold-faced lie. He tried to get the entire lawsuit dismissed, but in October 2025, just weeks ago, a judge ruled that most of the claims could proceed to trial. The legal nightmare was just beginning. By late 2024, the financial picture for Kevin Costner had become truly terrifying. Let's add up the damage. He'd invested $38 million of his own money into Horizon, most of it borrowed against his Santa Barbara estate. The film had earned just $32.6 million worldwide, meaning he'd lost virtually his entire investment. Warner Brothers had canceled the theatrical release of Chapter 2. Chapters 3 and 4, which he'd already filmed, were sitting in limbo with no distribution deal in sight. The mortgage on his estate was now a crushing weight, a monthly obligation that wasn't going away. Then there was the divorce settlement. In September 2023, a judge ruled that Costner would pay Christine $63,209 per month in child support. That's over $758,000 per year, every year, until his youngest child turned 18. And that didn't include the property settlement, the division of assets, the legal fees that had piled up during months of contentious litigation. Christine had walked away with millions. Costner was left holding debt he couldn't pay off and obligations he couldn't escape. His income situation had completely collapsed. The Yellowstone money, that guaranteed $1 million+ per episode, was gone. He'd walked away from it voluntarily, betting everything on Horizon. There were no major film roles lined up. No studio wanted to work with him after the Horizon disaster. His reputation as a director had been damaged, possibly beyond repair. And now he had a sexual harassment lawsuit heading to trial, the kind of legal battle that could cost millions in legal fees alone, even if he won. Industry insiders started whispering the unthinkable. Multiple sources told tabloids that Costner could be facing bankruptcy. A financial analyst called the Horizon Project a threat to the estate of Kevin Costner and the financial kiss of death. The Hollywood Reporter included him on their list of biggest losers of 2024, a humiliating recognition of just how badly things had gone wrong. Sources close to Costner said he was in crisis meetings, trying to figure out how to salvage something from the wreckage. His best hope was streaming. Reports emerged in early 2025 that Costner was hoping Netflix or another platform would bail him out, would license the Horizon films, and give him enough money to pay down his debts. But streaming platforms were cautious. They'd seen the theatrical numbers. They'd read the reviews. Why would they invest tens of millions in a project that audiences had already rejected? Costner's net worth, which had been estimated at around $250 million at his peak, was plummeting. The Santa Barbara estate was at risk. His financial security, built over 40 years in Hollywood, was evaporating. And the worst part was that he'd done this to himself. Every decision, every choice that led to this moment had been his. So here we are, November 2025. Kevin Costner, one of the most celebrated actors and directors of his generation, is facing a reality that would have seemed impossible just a few years ago. His marriage is over. His ex-wife has remarried the man who was in their lives during the final years of their relationship. His financial security is in ruins, destroyed by a passion project that audiences rejected. And he's preparing to face a sexual harassment trial that could further damage what's left of his reputation. In recent interviews, Costner has tried to maintain a brave face. He talks about spending the holidays alone for the first time in decades, fighting to keep his kids together as a bachelor. He insists that Horizon will find its audience eventually, that streaming platforms or future theatrical releases will prove he was right all along. But there's a weight in his voice now, a recognition that things didn't go according to plan. When asked about leaving Yellowstone, he maintains that he did everything his contract required, that the scheduling conflicts were real and unsolvable. But you can hear the regret underneath the justifications. The brutal truth is that Kevin Costner made a choice that cost him everything. He chose artistic vision over financial security. He chose a 36-year-old dream over a guaranteed paycheck. He chose his legacy over his marriage. And in the end, he got neither the legacy he wanted nor the life he had. Horizon will be remembered, but not as the masterpiece he envisioned. It'll be remembered as one of the biggest financial disasters in modern Hollywood, a cautionary tale about ego, obsession, and the danger of believing your own mythology. Meanwhile, Yellowstone finished its run without him to massive success. The show proved it didn't need John Dutton to tell compelling stories. Taylor Sheridan's empire continued to expand with multiple spin-offs and new projects. The cast and crew moved on, and Kevin Costner, the man who was supposed to be irreplaceable, was replaced. There's a lesson in this story, one that Hollywood has taught over and over again throughout its history. When everyone around you is warning that you're headed for disaster, when financial advisors are begging you to reconsider, when your own wife is terrified about what you're risking, maybe they're not trying to hold you back. Maybe they're trying to save you from yourself. Kevin Costner wouldn't listen to those warnings. He was convinced he knew better, that his vision was worth any sacrifice, that the dream he'd carried for 36 years couldn't possibly fail. And now he's living with the consequences. The legend of Kevin Costner will forever be marked by these choices, not just by the Oscars and the iconic roles, but by the moment when everything came crashing down. By the question that will haunt him for the rest of his life: was the dream worth the price he paid?